Alright, so I'm gonna be talking about another important article for zero-shot entity linking. And this article is in 2020. And so the idea is this paper is that it introduces a conceptually simple, scalable, and highly effective BERT-based entity linking model, along with an extensive evaluation of its accuracy-speed trade-off. We present a two-stage zero-shot linking algorithm, where each entity is defined only by a short textual description. So we only use short textual description. We are not using type descriptions of entities. And so the first stage does the retrieval in a dense space defined by an encoder that independently embeds the mentioned context and the entity descriptions. Each candidate is then re-ranked with a cross-encoder that concatenates the mention and entity tags. So this is a standard because first we do retrieval. This is one of the paradigms that is becoming very, very popular in entity linking. So we do first a retrieval, then we select. So now we have top K candidates. And now we have among these top candidates, we do re-ranking. Do you know why? Because among millions of entities, we have selected only K of them. But this K number of entities are very noisy. Even if we are missing lots of entities. So that's why we need to re-rank it and hopefully get all the correct entities for mentions. So we encode this sentence. We encode it, and this is a mention, and we have only the descriptions of entities that we have in our ontology, in our database, and then we are in a dense space. So we want to make this dense between this one and the correct one very close as possible, but not the negative sample. And for example, so until this stage, everything is retrieval. But next stage is re-ranking, which we use cross-encoder. And the methodology is that figure 1, this figure that I've just shown, shows our overall approach. The by-encoder uses two independent BERT transformers to encode model context or mention an entity into dense vectors, and each entity candidate is scored as a dot product of these vectors. So in retrieval, we usually use dot product of them. We don't give all of them into the same transformer, but in the cross encoder, we usually do that because it's feasible. I mean, it's practical, and the cross encoder encodes context and mention and entity in just one transformer. We don't use by encoder because we have only top K candidates. There are not millions of candidates, so we can do it. It's feasible. This red is reducer work. Reducer works like a pooling mechanism, because the idea of pooling is because we have lots of and it's a sequence of vectors, so we need to reduce these to just one vector, so we just use pooling. And we do it for both mention and entity. Then we have context and mention modeling. For the representation of context mention, tau m is composed of word pieces of the context surrounding the mention and the mention itself. So context left, context right, and these are special tokens that we use. And then we have entity modeling. For entity modeling, we have a title and a description of entity. And finally, we have scoring, which is just a dot product of the mention embedding and the entity embedding. So as I said, reduce, this is transformer, and then we do pooling. So the optimization is just, we want to maximize this one. It means that we want to minimize this minus of that thing. In machine learning, we minimize things. And we don't want these things, the rest of that, the negative samples. And for inference, the entity representation of all entity candidates can be computed and cached. The inference task is then reduced to find maximum dot product between mentioned representation and entity candidate representation. And for cross-encoder, we use this scoring. It's just one linear layer, just learning this W, because we already know the representation of mention and entity. But for cross-encoder to score the entity, because we need to score it, then we need this. So this is just a linear layer. And finally, for optimization, we use a softmax loss to maximize this score of mention and entity. And we do with knowledge distillation because for high speed, we need to do these things as well. And the data sets that we use are zero-shot entity linking data set. I mean, this is very popular. It was in 2019 from Wikia. And also this data set, which is widely used for evaluating entity linking systems. And this data set we use unseen mentions, Wikilinks NED. And